Have you ever fired someone for not coming to work on time? I started my own company about 5 years ago. In my second year, I had grown to where I needed help. In the interviews, I made it clear that if you can't make it to work or were going to be late, it would not affect you as long as you let me know that morning or the day before. I didn't want to be sitting around waiting for someone who wasn't going to show. It's just common courtesy, you know, that thing called respect. He was a good employee. He worked hard. He learned fast. After a month he didn't show or call. The next day he showed up apologizing. I let it slide. Within 2 weeks he was a no-show 2 more times and I had to let him go. He still stood by every so often wanting his job back. I've hired 6 people since him. Not one has lasted more than 3 months. They all end up not calling when they aren't going to show up for work. I don't know why it's so hard for people to just call. Before I started my company, I worked for companies. I'd oversleep or wake up sick. I'd call my boss as soon as I woke up. I'd hate to disappoint or let down my boss, especially if I really needed to be there that day. But shit happens that's out of our control. Most decent bosses understand that. If they don't, then they learn to deal with it. I've never been fired for being late or missing a day when I've called my boss. There was a job that I had applied for that I had been trying to get for a while. I finally got hired. On my first day of work, my truck wouldn't start. I called my neighbors, friends, and even a taxi, but no one could get me to work on time. I really hated to call my new boss and tell him my truck wouldn't start. I had 30 minutes before I had to be at work. It took 20 minutes to get there. I knew I wasn't going to get there on time. I was pretty sure that being my first day I would probably not get a second day. I figured I had nothing to lose by calling my boss, so I called him. My boss was a big man. He had that face that always looked mad. He was very intimidating, at least to me he was. On the phone, I explained that I'd spent the last hour trying to find a ride or someone to help me state my POS truck. I told him I know how this must look like I'm irresponsible, but I really am a very responsible person. I'm sure I sounded desperate and overly apologetic. I was. I waited for him to say something. There was a long pause. I heard him fumbling with papers or something. Then he asked me if the address on my application was correct. I said yes. He said to be ready in 20 minutes. He picked me up. He even let me drive a company vehicle until mine was repaired. And since I was just starting the job, he figured I didn't have the money to repair it, so he had it towed to his mechanic and deducted the repairs out of my pay, a little each week. He truly was the best boss I ever had. Unfortunately, his company had some legal issues and everyone was laid off. When he got things straightened out, he asked me to come back to work. I had already found a better job, but we followed each other on FB. When I started my own company, he called one day and asked how it was doing. He had already had stores in 5 major cities. I valued any and all advice he would give me. A few months later, during the slow season, he called and asked me if I'd help him for about a month. He said he wanted to expand his business to the city I was living in. All he wanted me to do was drive his company vehicle with his business logo and phone number around to advertise. A brand new truck with a company gas card. At that time I was still in my first year of self-employed. Money was tight. My future was unknown. My job requires a lot of driving. The money I'd spend on gas each week was more than I was able to afford some weeks, especially in the slow season. I don't think I would have been able to save my company had he not done this. I don't think he really did this to promote his business. He never opened a store in my city. I think he just knew I'd be struggling and this was his way of helping without ruining his tough image. He'll never admit it. When I see him now, I always tell him how grateful I am for all he's done for me. He says he hasn't done anything, that I'm the one who got me where I'm at. I tell him I know better. I know there's a kind heart or sweet teddy bear behind the tough man's appearance. He will try to hide a smile, but I see it. I pray that he is all the wonderful things life has to offer. The world needs more people like him.